Hey guys, hope you all doing all right out there. So my paper was about the causes of the Scottish Revolution of 1637 to 1651. So the Scottish Revolution begins in 1637 with the prayer book riots at St. Giles Cathedral in Edinburgh. And according to legend, a peasant woman named Jenny Geddes picked up her stool while the priest was reading from the New Book of Common Prayer. And this new Book of Common Prayer was introduced by Charles I, and it was based on the English Book of Common Prayer. And Jenny Geddes yelled out, "How dare ye say Mass in my ear?" and threw her chair at the priest and started this riot. In 1638, the Scots signed the National Covenant, and in November and December of 1638, they have a church assembly at Glasgow. And they abolished the bishops, and they also abolished the Book of Common Prayer as well. In 1640, we get the Second Bishops' Wars. The Scots invade England, and Russell, in The Causes of the English Civil War, argues that this was the spark that caused the English Civil War. So we have learned about it already, but you just may not have realized that this was actually a Scottish Revolution that was going on. The Scottish Revolution ends in 1651 with the defeat of Charles II at the Battle of Worcester, and Cromwell defeats Charles II at Worcester, and he conquers Scotland. So that was the end of the revolution. Now, the Scottish Revolution was the contemporary and counterpart of the English Revolution, but the two revolutions were different. And there was one major difference that will get us into our causes. The Scottish royalists never really get off the ground. Scotland doesn't really gather a significant royalist party, while in England they have these huge battles, and they have these several years of war in England. In Scotland, it just doesn't really happen. So the first cause of the Scottish Revolution was Scottish nationalism, and by nationalism I mean national unity and patriotism. And this is shown by the lack of Scottish royalists. And the major source that I used for this point was The Civil Wars in Britain and Ireland by Martin Bennett. And he talks about the campaign of the first Marquis of Montrose, James Graham. And he is the head of the royalist forces in Scotland. And Montrose's army was mostly made up of Irish Catholic soldiers and Scottish Highlanders who all spoke Gaelic. Now, this army was seen as foreign to most Scots because most Scots were Protestant and lived in the lowlands. And Montrose's army was crushed at the Battle of Philiphaugh in September of 1645. After the battle, the Irish, they were given no quarter, and over 2,000 men, women, and children died because they also gave no quarter to the camp followers. And after Philiphaugh, the Scottish royalists never really launched another significant campaign. Montrose does launch another campaign in 1650, but it ends with him being defeated again, and he is executed in Edinburgh in 1650. So the second cause of the Scottish Revolution was Scottish religion. And during the Scottish Reformation, Scotland turned Presbyterian. And when Charles introduced this new Book of Common Prayer to Scotland, they saw it as this gross example of popery. They thought that this Book of Common Prayer threatened to break the Scottish covenant with God. The Scots believed that their nation was chosen by God to be a new Israel on earth, that God had chosen their church to be the most perfectly reformed and the most godly in the world, and that it was their destiny and their God-given, destiny to spread the Scottish Reformation to England. And what Charles was doing was threatening that. They said that Scotland's cause was God's cause, that God was on their side in everything that they were going to do. And the Scots thought that the 1640 invasion of England would prepare the way for the return of Christ. Many people believed that the end of days was near in the 1630s. It could be next week, could be next year, but they thought that this invasion of England to spread the Reformation to England would help prepare, the world for the end of days. So the Scots saw that what Charles was doing with the Book of Common Prayer and church reform with the innovations, they threatened their very lives, they threatened their nation, and it threatened their very souls. It was like it was going to define whether they went to heaven or hell or not. And two major sources that I used were these two Covenanter propaganda pamphlets that were printed in 1640. One is called The Intentions of the Army of the Kingdom of Scotland, and the other one is called The Lawfulness of Our Expedition into England. And basically what the Scottish revolutionaries say is that they are coming into England, they are invading England to come after these corrupt advisors that are essentially the spawn of Satan, who are whispering these, anti-Christian things in Charles' ear that are making him do these things. They're not coming to overthrow the monarchy. They don't have anything against the English themselves. They're after those advisors, and they want these advisors gone because they are making Charles bad at his job. They're making Charles not listen to them. They wanted Charles to listen to his people, the Scottish people, because it was his job to protect the true religion, which they, saw as Presbyterianism, and to protect their rights and liberties as Scots. And what he was doing was threatening all of that. And they thought it was, of course, his duty to do these things, but they thought, Charles has got these advisors around him, we gotta get rid of them. They're not listening to us. And they have to protect the covenant with God because they thought divine wrath would come down upon them if they broke this covenant. It's just, they even went all the way back to say that their cause was, the original cause was, God's cause when he, took the Jews out of slavery in Egypt. They compared it to that, the liberation of God's people from slavery. And they thought that if they didn't fight, that they would be enslaved by popery and that they would all basically be hellbound. When they renewed the National Covenant in 1638, it was a renewal of the Negative Confession, which was seen as the original Scottish Covenant with God, which was written in 1581. And it's called the Negative Confession mostly because it's more anti-Catholic than it is anything else. And they thought that they had to renew the covenant in 1638 because they had to protect themselves and to protect their religion and to protect their nation. They thought that they had to, that God had ordained them to do this. And basically what they did, the first part of the National Covenant is actually just the Negative Confession. And then they list all these acts of Parliament and they go on and on. It's supposed to be, Covenant 2.0 in 1638. So this gets us into the third cause of the Scottish Revolution, which was Charles I. And Charles was absolutely unyielding and unwilling to step down from his religious point of view, and he did not want to negotiate with the Covenanters at all. He had no intention. And his view was actually the opposite of the Scottish view. The Scottish imperial view that Conrad Russell talks about in The Fall of the British Monarchies, that Scotland was destined to spread Presbyterianism into England and to the rest of the world, was the complete opposite of what Charles wanted. Charles wanted to spread Anglican uniformity to all of his kingdoms, and he demanded this uniformity, and part of that uniformity plan was the Book of Common Prayer. And even though the Scots said that they weren't mad at Charles themselves, he took it personally. He saw it as, a personal attack. He saw the Covenanters and their revolution as a direct threat to his authority in Scotland. So he was not willing to back down. He truly believed that God was on his side. And when these two completely contrasting ideas, come together, none of the sides are willing to negotiate at all. And that is the only outcome from that was the Scottish Revolution. And that's why I put the start date at 1637, because that's when this whole conflict starts. So what I would have done differently with this paper is I would have found more primary sources just across the board, especially with Montrose. I would have tried to find some of his letters, and I wish I would have tried to find some more stuff about Charles, because I mostly relied on secondary sources for Charles and for the point about Scottish nationalism. That's all I got, guys. Have a good rest of your day, rest of your night. Bye.